make me hyperventilate. I mean, no, these were very nice words. Listening to the presentations this afternoon and to the discussion, I decided to change gears. I will tell more than the slide that is on the display there, but I want to tell a little bit my story of getting acquainted with social innovation and why I think it's useful to use it as a scientific concept. I especially want to do this because, the last speaker was saying, well, should we really use this concept when talking to people? And the answer was given by some of you. I think Gabrielle also said, it depends whom you're talking to, of course. If you look at policy circles and you talk with politicians or activists who have inscribed themselves in a social innovation program, then of course they know what is meant by social innovation, or they know the many meanings that are given to social innovation and how they can communicate with each other. So I will deal with that a little bit later. That will be the third part of my presentation, if you like. I myself started to use the concept of social innovation back in the 80s, the end of the 1980s, when I was doing work for the European Commission in the setting of the Poverty Tree program. And we had to look at strategies, local development strategies to combat poverty. And I will shorten this story a little bit. We had to look at different localities in Europe that had to fight deindustrialization and find alternatives for deindustrialization. We were looking at Roskilde, we were looking at Charleroi in Belgium, Antwerp in Belgium, and many other localities. All this is described in one of my first books on social innovation, integrated area development, and so on. So we were talking to these communities and seeing what they were doing in terms of local development strategies. And basically what they were doing was satisfying needs that had been abandoned, that had been alienated, some of which were no longer met by corporate agents, enterprises, small and big, or by the local state, or which could no longer be provided by civil society because social bonds had suffered tremendously on the crisis mechanisms and so on. So that gave us our first dimension of social innovation in a way, satisfying needs that were badly met, that were no longer met, and that probably had to be met by a different constellation of actors and agents. Second, what we observed was that what was really detrimental for these localities, who were suffering from closing down of shipyards, factories, service providers, and so on, was that people who lost their jobs turned inside to themselves, stopped talking to each other, became very ashamed of their fate in a way. And in other words, moved away from the social bonds that existed between them. So we saw that these local initiatives trying to fight the consequences of deindustrialization were focusing very much on restoring bonds, re-establishing bonds, rebuilding community, if you like, which gave us, scientists, abstracting what we saw, the second dimension, which is innovating in social relations. And the third one was, these communities felt really abandoned by the political world, or these communities found out that they were small players in very often large metropolitan contexts, and they were looking for ways to have influence on policy making. They were looking for ways to transform the socio-political system. They were looking for ways to have an influence on the local socio-political regime. which brought us to the third dimension. Communities empowering themselves in order to develop sufficient and exert sufficient pressure on the local political system, and in many cases also trying to transform the socio-political system. As we are seeing today, for example, in Barcelona, with the very important role that the movements, the social movements have played in bringing Carl to the status of mayor and transforming also the urban policy. So we introduced the term social innovation as a kind of an overarching concept that could bring together these three dimensions and that could be explained in other situations but the localities we were working with. So we thought as good scientists that by abstracting literally, seeing what we saw and then bringing it together under an abstract label that could then be retranslated in other places, but still under this triple flag of social innovation, three dimensions of social innovation, which we keep saying